Chapter 13. Carrots and Hugs Don't Mix. Good one, Sergeant. Now what's the lamb really doing in my store? I'm here to get both these new recruits outfitted for the night guard, Quartermaster Carrot, Gloom repeated. The grizzled earth stallion across the counter gave Gloom a look like he suspected the bat pony had spent too long out flying under the sun. I'm being serious, he said. So am I, sir, Gloom replied. Crimson and Prey waited behind Gloom in the quartermaster's storehouse. After getting Prey a fresh bandage for his ear, they'd come straight here. Behind the quartermaster's counter, aisles of chest plates, chamfrons, helmets, plumes, horseshoes, and other armor hung on racks that went back into the gloom, and a metal cage from floor to ceiling blocked off access to it all. Carrot leaned over the counter and looked down at Prey, who returned his disbelieving look with a bright smile. It's a lamb, Carrot stated flatly. Yes, sir. He's also part of the IS&D, too, Gloom said. The lieutenant told me about the princess creating some new division. Can't say I think much of the idea. Waste of resources, Carrot said gruffly. Prey silently agreed, but as it was this waste of resources that had gotten him out of prison, he wasn't complaining. Crimson was watching the whole conversation with the cool stoicism that Prey expected, while Gloom looked like he was resigned to patiently arguing this one through. Quartermaster, I was assigned by Captain Nighthawk to outfit them as I thought best, and I have his permission to request supplies from the storehouse. If you could please get them outfitted, we'll get out of your mane and on our way, Gloom sighed. You're not getting anything for your pet lamb, and that's final. As for your Pegasus friend, that depends on whether I think he can be trusted not to injure himself, Carrot replied flatly, not caring in the least about Gloom's authority from the night guard captain. Prey thought the quartermaster was smarter than he let on. Prey didn't want to be outfitted in anything thank you very much, and for good reason. He was a runt, so nothing would fit. It would only weigh him down. He had no experience wearing armor of any kind, and neither did he wish to be dressed up like some child's doll with a signal proclaiming him property of the night guard. Sir, I agree with the quartermaster. I don't need anything, and I doubt there's anything in my size anyway, Prey spoke up. You're a member of the night guard, and you need some form of uniform, Gloom said, hurriedly gesturing him to be quiet. A sheep, especially a lamb, is not a night guard. That's just a bad joke, Carrot grunted. Crimson stirred. Excuse me, sir, but Prey is actually part of the night. I already told you quite plainly no, Carrot interrupted, and I'm not changing my mind. You're not the one who has to keep this here storehouse running, and I'm not about to bust my back for something as foolish as outfitting a sheep. The quartermaster turned away as if the dispute was settled. Let's see about outfitting Mr. Christian Trace here, if he can pass muster, that is, Carrot said, flipping up the hinged counter stall. Get in, he ordered, jerking his head at Crimson. Gloom made to follow, but Carrot slammed the counter shut again. Respectfully, sir, I must remain with all my soldiers. Soldiers? Ha! I only see one, and even that remains to be seen. Carrot reached under the counter and pulled out a battered and scratched plain version of the Royal Guard's chestplate. Here, he said, tossing it at Crimson. Let's see if you can put that on without your mother holding your hoof. Crimson caught the chestplate stiffly, his wings bunching with irritation, but, yes, sir, was all he quietly said. Gloom meaningfully put a hoof down. Quartermaster Carrot, I'm not trying to start a fight, but I have orders to follow. When I have mine, you overgrown bat, Carrot snapped, making Gloom's slit eyes narrow. And I'm not intimidated by the likes of you either. So you can just stand there like a good sergeant and wait till I'm done. I didn't get this post because I'm cushy and soft. You know I can take you any time, he said flatly. I'm not instigating a fight, and it's my duty to inform you that you were out of line and prohibited from taking action that might lead to one either, Gloom answered. Carrot didn't so much as blink. Not impressed. The lamb still isn't getting anything, he said with a snort. And you? Weren't you done yet? Carrot snapped, swiveling back around. Crimson met his gaze levelly. Yes, he answered. The chestplate was now strapped on. Carrot grunted and stepped closer, tugging harshly on the plating and checking the straps and adjustments. Crimson kept his blank look, but Prey could tell he was barely tolerating the abrasive stallion's inspection. Humph, you could certainly be worse. For instance, you could be missing a leg and blind, Carrot grunted. Stepping back to the counter, he pulled out the rest of the armor set. Prove you also know how to put that on, and I'll consider the faint possibility that you might know the very basics, he groused. Gloom tried not to glower. Then his ears flicked up and he looked around. Prey, where are you? Prey looked up innocently from where he was perched on a box in the corner. Right here, sir. I'm just... He looked at Carrot with a strange smile. Just watching. Watching and listening to the constant stream of casual racism. Not that anyone else could hear it. The quartermaster didn't think much of Crimson. Overgrown chicken. And even less of Gloom. Jump a bat who thinks he's Princess Luna's blessing to all of Equestria. The grizzled stallion thought of himself as a veteran and obviously felt very entitled to his own opinions. His thoughts on Prey were, "Whiny children don't belong in here. Must be some mistake or big joke on Her Majesty's part. Maybe she is just desperate for a mascot." Prey somehow doubted Carrot was a veteran. He certainly had the attitude, but he was a pony. Ponies were soft. Unless there had been a war in the 57 years Prey had been away, he doubted Carrot had seen any real action. While Crimson was struggling with putting on the rest of the training armor set, and Gloom was silently fuming, Prey decided to test his theory. Carrot, sir, how often do these sets of armor get damaged? Prey asked, drawing everyone's attention. Too often, was the blunt reply. They never listen to my warnings on proper maintenance. What happens when they are? Do you repair them, or is there a blacksmith? No, armorer, Carrot answered. Alderman Smithy. Annoying lamb won't shut up. How many sets of armor do you have in here, sir? It must be quite a lot to outfit all of the guard. Prey asked next. None of your business, lamb, Carrot retorted, turning away. Only 200 spare sets, but Captain won't listen to me and ordering more. How about the Royal Guard weaponry, then? Prey hummed. Carrot shot Gloom an annoyed look. Keep your sheep in check. If all he's going to do is ask questions, you can get out, he snapped. Strange lamb, I don't like it. Short swords and a surplus of presentation spears. Bah! Nothing proper like we had in my day. Just one more question, please, sir, and then I'll keep quiet, I promise, Prey said with all of the innocent sincerity his 9-year-old lamb frame could muster. Carrot didn't acknowledge him, but the ear cocked in his direction showed he was listening. You look like an old army hoof. You must have been in lots of fights, Prey squeed, clashing his forehoofs together and leaning forward in eager anticipation. Have you ever killed somebody? He asked. They all jerked at that. Gloom's look of worried confusion as he watched Prey question the quartermaster changed to open disapproval. Prey! Gloom reprimanded. That's none of your fucking business, you oversized piece of dandruff! Carrot snarled, rounding on Prey, but he pulled up short when he saw the look of wounded innocence on Prey's face. So instead of storming over, Carrot just jabbed a hoof in his direction. Not another word! Got it? He growled. Prey nodded dutifully. Yes, sir, my apologies. I didn't mean to remind you about that griffin, he said. Carrot's head jackknifed around. What did you say? He demanded, a look of stunned outrage on his face. Gloom took a step forwards like he might be getting ready to put himself between the quartermaster and Prey. I said, my apologies, sir. I didn't mean to bring up any bad memories, Prey said, blinking slowly. Why? What did you think I said? Carrot glared at Prey for a long moment, his hooves grinding into the floorboards, but he couldn't do anything about it. Nothing, he eventually snorted. Gloom and also Crimson were giving Prey confused looks, but he just smiled back at them. Finished, Crimson quietly declared, having strapped on the last shin guard. Carrot took a moment to refocus on his task, having been caught up in his thoughts. All right, let's see how bad it is then, he muttered. He walked around Crimson following the same routine he had with the chest plate, tugging on straps, checking the tightness, and looking for loose play in the way the armor was settled. Congratulations, you're not as useless as I first thought. You get your own set of armor. Come by tomorrow, same time to sign for it. Now let's see how you hold a spear, Carrot grunted. Sir, only armor for now, please. The ISND will have its own issued weaponry, so that's not needed, Gloom hastily interjected. But is there any way we can get that armor today instead? The sooner Crimson's outfitted and in uniform, the better, he added. More like you don't trust Crimson enough yet and you don't want to come back here to deal with Carrot again, Prey thought, reading Gloom's real intentions in his thoughts. No, come back tomorrow, Carrot said bluntly. Gloom looked distinctly put out by that. Prey didn't blame him. The quartermaster was definitely abrupt and rude, but Prey didn't actually hate Carrot. At least, not how he usually hated every single pony he met on sight. For one thing, Carrot was an earth pony, the only type who had ever been in the Resistance. Earth ponies were the only one who had ever farmed, sweated, and labored amongst the villagers, and the only ones to oppose the Sun Wolf. As much good as it did them in the firestorm, Prey snorted to himself. The other reason that Prey didn't deeply hate Carrot on sheer principle was that the Earth Pony was, or had been at one point, a killer. He knew what it was to take a life, and Prey saw in Carrot's thoughts how that moment had changed him. Prey could forgive a lot on Carrot's part because of that. Prey could understand that. They finished up in the quartermaster's office, got Crimson out of the test armor, and left. The door had been barely shut behind them before Gloom demanded, "What was that, Prey?" It was obvious what Gloom was referring to, so Prey didn't bother playing dumb. "Exactly what it sounded like. Finding out more about our quartermaster," Prey replied. "What were you talking about? What griffin were you referring to?" Gloom pressed. Prey unconsciously put a bit more distance between the two of them so that he was out of Hoof's range as always. "The griffin he killed in his career, of course," he answered. Both Crimson and Gloom went quiet and looked at him. "And how did you know about that?" Crimson asked carefully. Prey stopped so he could face both of them and made a show of taking a deep, calming breath. "The same way I could guess about your story, Crimson. There were loads of clues. His abrasive attitude and temper, his profession in the border guard at one point shown by the old epaulet hung on the wall, the fact that he most likely asked for a transfer before he was commissioned as the quartermaster, the 4 talon scars poking out from under the armor on his left shoulder. All that points to the possibility, but by his reaction to my question definitely confirms it," Prey explained. Crimson's wings twitched. "Why did you say it, though? Did you feel it was necessary to bring it up and throw it in his face?" Crimson asked. "No, but I did anyway. Ponies always feel entitled to pry into others' pasts, but don't like it when it's done to them. Also, it's now our job to dig out secrets in this ISND division," Prey answered. "Not like that. We're on the same side. What you did was not okay," Gloom said disapprovingly. "And I thought we were getting somewhere," his thoughts read. Prey frowned. This was going further than he'd intended. He'd merely wanted to get under Carrot's skin. "He was being rude to both of you, and almost openly racist against you, Sergeant. I don't like racist ponies any more than Crimson does," Prey replied, glancing away. That would make him look like he was just being loyal, in a misguided sort of way. Gloom pushed down a sigh. "Thanks, kid. Prey. But you didn't need to do something like that. I can deal with my own problems," Gloom said. "If that's what you want, then okay," Prey said simply with a shrug. They resumed walking in a thoughtful silence after that, as Gloom led them towards the clerk and liaison's office. Prey knew that, as he'd plucked it from Gloom's thoughts as they went. Prey's legs were still weak, and the long hours spent cleaning out the office certainly had not improved his general condition, the shower notwithstanding. And the fact that he hadn't magically grown in the last 10 minutes or so meant that he had to, as always, canter all the time just to keep up. So it was that Prey was actually glad when they came to a stop outside the clerk's office. It said so on the door. Gloom knocked briskly. "Ma'am, Sergeant Gloom and Company," he announced. Personally, Prey would have listened at the keyhole to check for an ambush before announcing his presence. "Come in," came the muffled call through the wood. Gloom pushed the door open to reveal what was once a spacious office, but due to the filing cabinets and stacks of brown folders stuffed into every available space, it ended up being cramped instead. In the middle of the room stood a desk that matched the style of the room, groaning under forms, paper, tray, files, and used mugs. Behind the desk sat the clerk herself, a medium-sized unicorn mare. Prey immediately slunk behind Gloom to provide himself with a meat shield. The mare glanced up from her furious scribbling, the orange aura fading from the quill as she slotted it back into the inkwell. "Ah, Sergeant Gloom! Great! You're just the pony I wanted to see," she said, Mane looking slightly frazzled. Gloom cocked an ear. "I am, ma'am?" he asked cautiously. Yes, there's so many forms here that require your signature. Your new division in the Night Guard has so much paperwork involved. It's not even funny. Even more so than usual, I mean. We're still trying to catch up with the backlog from the reinstitution of the Night Guard, and now this too. Honestly, couldn't you have waited?" she asked huffily, rummaging around behind the desk. "Now, where did I put that stack?" "It wasn't intentionally done, just to spite you, Taffy," Gloom said dryly. "That's what they all say, yet they don't do the paperwork," the mare called Taffy grumbled. "Aha! Here we go," she said, levitating up an intimidating stack of papers and dumping them in front of the sergeant. Gloom gave it a wary look. "Surely this isn't—" "Everything that you have to sign, yes, in triplicate," Taffy said gleefully. Ma'am, I don't really have time for this. We came to get the assigned records and files that have been set aside for the ISND. We're supposed to pick them up this morning, and now we're running behind schedule. Can't you please just give us the files and we'll do this later? Nope! Gloom sighed. Taffy, please. Taffy scowled at him for a long moment. Who's your civilian friend? She asked, abruptly changing topics. Crimson, Crimson said, answering for himself. He's one of the new ISND Night Guard. We just haven't gotten around to getting him his armor yet, Gloom put in. Taffy blushed slightly. Oops! Sorry, Sergeant. I was trying to guilt trip you into the paperwork in front of the civilian. Wait, I didn't mean it like that. Taffy hopes. Could you please just give us the files? I promise I'll come by later and deal with the paperwork. Gloom sighed. Taffy was still eyeing up Crimson. You promise? She asked suspiciously. Yes. A smile lit up her features. All right then. But first, Crimson, what's your favorite type of fudge? Taffy asked. Crimson blinked. Pardon? I don't see how. Getting to know you. I always ask any pony new. Breaks the ice, see? So, what is it? Taffy asked, leaning forwards across the messy desk. Crimson looked at her blankly. I do not have one. I have never had fudge, he answered. What? Never? How come? Taffy asked with a disappointed frown. Crimson shrugged. It was never a luxury that was available where where I come from, he replied. Oh? And where's that? It must be somewhere very far away if it doesn't even have fudge. Is it beyond the mountains or up north? I always love learning about foreign cultures, and that also explains your accent. You must have some interesting stories to share from before you joined up. Taffy enthused. So, that's why you weren't opposed to the Night Guard of Gloom, Prey thought. He could hear that the Thestral sergeant being referred to thought that Taffy Hopes was a bit of a weirdo, but harmless. I do not wish to talk about it, ma'am. It's no longer relevant, Crimson said flatly. She looked a bit hurt, but Gloom took the opportunity to jump in. Ma'am, we really need to get going. Can we please have the files? He asked. Oh, those aren't here, Taffy shrugged. Crimson's eye twitched for a second before he got it under control, while Gloom took a deep, calming breath before slowly letting it out. If they're not in here, then where might they be, please? Gloom asked patiently. In the records department, of course. Why? Didn't any pony tell you, Sergeant? Taffy asked with a smirk. No, they didn't. It's just something else to add to the list of what no pony thought to tell us, Gloom growled quietly. He snapped a quick salute to Taffy. Thank you for your help, ma'am, but we need to be on our way then. Fine, but don't forget your promise. I need all those signed in triplicate, remember? Taffy laughed as they filed out the door. Her eyes aligned on Prey just as the door was closing, and he saw her look of confusion just before the door closed. Sergeant, who's... And then the door clicked shut. And now, on to the records department, Gloom grumbled. That was the clerk and liaisons officer? Prey asked. Yeah, she's friendly, good at her job, but always complaining about it. I imagine that we're going to be seeing a lot of her over the course of our time in the ISND, Gloom said. Is her office position military, or... Nah, it's clerical, Gloom answered. Ah, good. That means she has no real authority over me, Prey thought. What is the difference between her role and this record department? Crimson asked. Taffy deals with everything related to the Royal and Night Guard. The records department deals with everything else. And don't they let you know it, Gloom answered as they went. They passed a number of royal guards as they left the guard section of the lower palace, heading for the records department. Apparently to get there, they needed to pass through a more civilian area of the palace. Prey knew for a fact that Gloom didn't miss the scornful and or fearful looks the new servants they passed gave the Thestral, and he doubted Crimson did either. At one point, Gloom stopped and led them down a side corridor to avoid someone who was apparently a noble coming the other way. A scion of the ridiculously wealthy house Fell, apparently. Whomever they were went at home. There it is, Gloom finally said as they came out from around a bend and saw a set of double doors, through which a couple of distracted-looking ponies were going in and out of. Prey wasn't close enough to hear their thoughts, but from the waistcoats they wore and papers they carried, he was sure they were accountants or clerks. They had a certain look about them, so similar to that one he'd caught sight of in the border guard's camp that one time. Prey had found that stallion's tent left unguarded on one of the 3 times he dared to sneak into the main encampment. He'd never ventured in deep, but on that occasion, he'd come across the accountant's tent. The fool had come out from Canterlot to see where the funds were going, having apparently heard that the fighting was over and they'd won the war, and so came out to demand an explanation for the constant drain on the treasury. He thought to earn a couple of feathers in his cap for a job well done. Firestrike had confined him to his quarters out of the way, and Prey had read through the stallion's angry letter that he'd left out on his cot. The clerk had written it to be sent back to Canterlot, complaining about his appalling treatment. Prey left a little something lethal in the accountant's water flask before he slipped out. Gloom marched up, still put out about the whole office dump cleaning out earlier, and pushed the doors open. Inside was a more organized and laid out version of Taffy Hope's office, but on a larger scale. For one thing, it had about 6 desks in use instead of just one, and far more filing cabinets for another. Prey observed the hustle and bustle with interest. "Yes, and what can I do for you?" a bored-looking blue stallion asked from the closest desk, barely looking up from his writing. "We're here to pick up the folders for the new ISND Night Guard division. Taffy Hope said they would be in here," Gloom said. The clerk looked up from his work with a thin smile. Yes, Sergeant Gloom. We were expecting you." He glanced up at the clock above the doorway. "Some 6 hours ago," he finished with dry contempt. "I apologize. There were multiple delays, but if you could just give us the correct papers, we'll get out of your way," Gloom said calmly. "I'm sorry, Sergeant, but the allotted time slot has come and gone, and we're very busy. We don't have time to unpack all of the folders again today. Come back tomorrow on time, and we'll see about it," the clerk sniffed. "He's lying," Prey spoke up in a sing-song voice. "That's the files over there," he said, waving a small hoof towards a large stack of boxes. Everyone stopped to look at him. "I beg your pardon?" the clerk asked, too shocked by the manner in which a lamb had spoken out against him to even be offended. Gloom turned back to the clerk, a cold look on his face. "My talents let me know when something isn't quite right, and Prey just confirmed it. Why did you lie?" he asked. So sick of these backbiting pencil pushers. The pencil pusher in question gaped for a second before hastily composing himself. "What are you talking about? Those boxes could be for any pony. I cannot be expected to keep track of all the myriad things." "Oh, look! Someone was kind enough to put a label on the boxes. Knight G. Sergeant Gloom. Today, it says. How thoughtful!" Prey announced joyfully. Gloom and Crimson joined in giving the clerk a look. Prey couldn't see it as they were turned away from him, but the blue stallion started sweating and couldn't meet their eyes. "Well, would you look at that? I made a mistake. How unusual. My apologies. It's been a long day after all," he hurriedly blustered. "Yes, I'm sure," Gloom said icily. Turning, he swept his gaze over the office, where every pony was busily eavesdropping without looking up from their all-important work. He snorted softly and jerked his head at Crimson. "Come on, let's get these boxes shifted," he said. "Too many to carry in one go, sir," Crimson commented as he eyed the stack. "To start with, we'll just shift them into the hall, and then decide where to go from there," Gloom instructed. "Come along, Prey." As it turned out, only Crimson and Gloom had to shift all 17 boxes to outside the door. Prey had braced his hooves and dug in his shoulder. He tried tilting or levering the box up, but no matter his efforts, it hardly lifted off the floor. Huffing, Prey kept trying, silently cursing his runt body for the millionth time in his extended life. Prey had lifted heavier weights before, but these boxes were just too large for him to get off the ground so he could even shuffle them onto his back. "If I was still in the resistance, it would be find a way or scream in agony," Prey thought as he strained, but still the box would not budge. It was infuriating. It didn't help that he was still tired from a long day doing heavy-duty cleaning. Nor did the indulgent chuckles from the office clerks behind him as they watched the little lamb try to copy the adults. "Prey," Gloom began uncertainly, "perhaps you should let us do that," he suggested, giving Prey a look like he expected the lamb would yell at him for daring to interfere. "All right," Prey said and stepped away. "What?" he asked the surprised Gloom as he headed for the door. He might not like being small, but he didn't have a complex about it, and they were much better suited to move large, bulky objects than he was. "All right, let's get going. This is going to take a couple of trips," Gloom sighed. The three of them were standing outside of the records department doors, with the pile of boxes now stacked against the wall. Gloom and Crimson were each balancing 3 boxes apiece on their backs with the aid of their wings. They hadn't given Prey any to carry, and he wasn't about to volunteer. Crimson eyed the remaining boxes with mild distaste. "No one will take the boxes while we're gone?" he questioned. "Who's going to want to randomly move boxes of paperwork? Luna knows I certainly don't," Gloom grumbled. "Just find some servants and order them to help," Prey suggested bluntly, then added, "Sir?" Gloom grimaced as he shuffled the boxes into a position hopefully less likely to fall and make a huge mess. As nice as that sounds, the god doesn't have the authority over the palace staff to interrupt their tasks and assign the new ones, as it's caused problems in the past. Only to keep them out of restricted areas, or if they're proven to be a nuisance, he answered. "Then grab a unicorn guard, or find a cart," Prey said. "Can't. They're on duty. And besides, the only ones nearby are in the Royal Guard. All the Night Guard are either off duty or busy. I can't countermand standing orders for the Royal Guard, only the Night Guard because I'm not a lieutenant. Might have to see about a cot, though," Gloom said tiredly as he began the trek back towards the recently cleared ISND office. "You don't seem to have much authority over anything, considering we apparently only answer to Captain Nighthawk and Princess Luna," Prey noted. Not that he wanted anything from either of those ponies. One behaved like some nighttime vigilante, and the other was an enthusiastic dark goddess. "Yeah, sure seems that way. The Night Guard is still very much in its beginnings, and there's so much legislation that hasn't been sorted out yet," Gloom answered. "I dislike having to fight past those that should be standing beside us," Crimson said flatly. Prey got the feeling he was talking about more than just today. "Me too," Gloom sighed, also referring to something else. "Me 3, Prey agreed, completing the trio of unvoiced events. Gloom groaned and stretched his back, hearing several bones pop. "Finally," he grumbled. "That was a most annoying waste of time," Crimson agreed flatly as he reviewed the freshly emptied stack of boxes in the middle of their new office. It had taken a while, what with carting the boxes back here, then unpacking the files and shoving them onto the shelves to be sorted out later. Even so, the 17 boxes didn't go very far to filling the solidly made shelving that lined the 3 alcoves. There was a minute's silence as they each evaluated their work and how empty the oak-paneled room still seemed. "This place will be perfect for laying down hidden runes," Prey thought, provided the gold bands around his legs didn't prohibit him from doing so. He still hadn't tested what capabilities he had left to him yet, and he didn't dare do so without preparation. That was also assuming Gloom took his eyes off him long enough for Prey to do so. Annoyingly, despite the sergeant's fairly relaxed attitude so far, the Thestral still hadn't let either of them out of his sight for more than 10 seconds. "Maybe I should blind him then," Prey thought. "Come, enough daydreaming where Princess Luna can't even have the joy of overseeing them. Let's get moving. It's dinner time," Gloom said, snapping them all from their thoughts. "Her Majesty can do that, sir?" Crimson asked. No, I was just saying. Look, I was trying to be funny, but it wasn't. It happens quite often, so don't dwell on it and let's go," Gloom said, herding them towards the door. "Oh, I was just wondering. I've heard many tales from my father of Her Majesty's strength. I was wondering if that was one of them," Crimson said, obviously feeling the need to explain his foolish question. "Nah, from what I understand, Her Majesty can't enter dreams unless the dreamer is properly asleep. Don't quote me on it, though," Gloom said. Prey breathed a sigh of relief at that, although it was only a small reprieve. Luna had said that she wouldn't enter his dreams unless he was having a nightmare. Not that he trusted her word for a second, but at least it was something. Luna was an all-powerful alicorn, and would do what she wanted when she wanted. But at least the moon goddess wouldn't be invading his waking mind during the day whenever she felt like it. Probably. They entered the bustling guards' mess hall through the same door they had that morning. This time, they went straight to the back of the queue for food, and once again, Crimson pulled out a second tray for Prey. Prey noticed the approval in Gloom's thoughts at Crimson's actions, and so reluctantly voiced his own polite thanks to the Pegasus to keep up the appearance that he was trying to form a team bond, gaining further mind approval in Gloom's thoughts. "It's all so you can kill them unsuspected later," Prey comforted himself. As the 3 of them shuffled down the line, he paid special attention to the non-Thestral and Night Guard members, listening to their thoughts as they shuffled down the line to see how they reacted to their counterparts. It was about what he'd expected, more dislike and distrust on both sides, although for the most part not overtly displayed. "Hello there again! Where's your little companion? You haven't done anything with him, have you?" came the threatening voice of Cookie above Prey's head over the counter. They had reached the serving hatch. "No, I'm right here," Prey piped up, and a moment later he jumped up and caught hold of the edge so he could see over it. "Hello again, Miss Cookie," he said sweetly. "There you are, dearie. It's good to see you. Tell me, has Crimson here been looking after you?" she asked with a smile, although on her stern muzzle it looked out of place. "Why, yes, he has. Thanks for asking. He doesn't say much, but he's a good colt, isn't he?" Prey asked with false cheer, silently wishing that he could kill the old cook right then and there. It was a shame that this humiliating act was so effective at winning the mare over, as attested to by her thoughts. "Such a polite little lamb. Almost makes my whole day worthwhile." Prey could feel Gloom's disbelieving stare on his back. Prey jerked his chin at the Thestral standing in line behind him. "Miss Cookie, I'd like you to meet Gloom. He's my sergeant," Prey told her. "Just Cookie, dear," she automatically corrected. Then, "Wait, did you say sergeant? Your sergeant?" "Yes, I've been signed up to the ISND. Isn't it great?" Prey giggled. Cookie's glare locked onto the sergeant's. "Has he now? I didn't know it was legal to sign up children, Sergeant Gloom," she said, making the rank sound like a filthy word. Gloom shot a look at Prey, which clearly said, "I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'll get you later." In fact, he swore as much in his thoughts as well. "Don't let him fool you, ma'am," Gloom hastily defended himself. "Her Royal Highness Luna brought Prey into the Night Guard herself. There were special circumstances that necessitated his conscription." "Conscription now, is it?" Cookie said, anger clear in her tone. "Miss, you're taking this out of context. Prey here—" "Prey? Is that how you Thestral see him? He's just a fool!" Cookie snapped. Excuse me, Miss Cookie, but it's all right. Prey's my actual name. Really, it is. And if Princess Luna decided that I must be here, then it must be all right, right? I mean, she wouldn't do it otherwise, so I'm sure it's fine." He offered her a heart-melting smile. "Sorry, we seem to be holding up your line, Miss Cookie. Could we please get some of your food so we can eat? I'm quite hungry." The Earth Pony mare was struck speechless for a second before she managed to get her voice back. Of course, dearie. No problem at all," she said faintly. With a bowl for each of Crimson's trays and another shoved aggressively at Gloom, they were shuffled up the queue and out of the line. A number of quiet murmurs followed them as they moved to a table in the corner and sat. "What was that for?" Gloom hissed at Prey the moment they were seated. Crimson didn't say anything, but he too was looking hard at Prey as he waited for an explanation. "Because I felt like it," Prey shrugged, stretching across the table to try and reach one of the bowls of vegetable stew. Crimson moved it back a couple of inches and out of reach. "I would like to hear a proper explanation, too," he said to Prey's annoyed glare. "Yeah! What was that earlier all about how you didn't want to be treated like a fool, and then you go and pull an act and also sick the cook on me in front of every pony, all while making the Night Guard look bad? Did you stop to consider any of that?" Gloom demanded in frustration. "Of course I did," Prey said with startling coldness. "I also distinctly remember telling you that I don't care what these other ponies think of me. If playing a simple child makes them like me, then I'll act like a child. It's an easy mask to wear." "You're just trying to garner sympathy by play-acting cute? That isn't acting childish. That is childish," Gloom snorted. Crimson nodded. "Yes, it is. And I don't like it, but I'll do it anyway. Makes life easier for all of us in the long run," Prey answered, reaching across the table again for the stew, but once again, Crimson held it out of his reach. "And why do you think that makes it okay for you to try and manipulate every pony around you? Others get by just fine without having to fake it, and so should you. Lying is the root of every problem. Princess Luna has picked us to live a second chance. Your words reflect badly on her. I am trying to befriend you, but you are making it hard," Crimson said, his odd phrasing strangely eloquent as he lectured Prey. Gloom joined in. "You shouldn't have done that, Prey. Now they're going to be even less inclined to take the ISND seriously. And the story of the Night Guard employing children is only going to spread if you keep making displays like that." Prey rolled his eyes. "That was going to happen anyway. Ponies talk. And seeing a lamb in the Night Guard was going to provoke those reactions regardless. The Night Guard is insular, and Princess Luna's decisions are already second-guessed by almost everyone. Aside from the difference in species and the fact that the Royal Guard perceive you as intruding on their territory, the reason the Royal Guard don't trust you. Besides, they still remember Nightmare Moon. She is not Nightmare Moon, and never was. That demon was banished for good, Gloom hissed. Prey held up his hoofs placatingly. I never said she was. I said they still remember Nightmare Moon, and it's coloring all their views. You know I'm only telling the truth. Gloom scowled, but reluctantly conceded the point. Nobody puts it quite like that, but yeah, he muttered. And that will take time to change. But for now, anything to make the Night Guard less alien is good. So my point boils down to this. I'm a freak, Prey stated without emotion. Prey didn't care about any of what he just said. It was all just a ploy to get everyone else to underestimate him. Prey held Gloom's yellow eyes as he continued. The Night Guard doesn't need another freak, so I'll be a normal lamb instead and fade into the background. That's the entirety of my point. There, finished, done. He paused and let a smirk pull up the corner of his mouth. And I'll admit, it was partly for the fun. Don't say you didn't find that funny in hindsight, Prey said slyly. Gloom didn't return the smile, and neither did Crimson, although it would have been astonishing if the Pegasus had. That's the second time you've called yourself a freak. Is that how you see yourself? Gloom asked, a thoughtful tone in his voice. Of course! What else could I be? Prey asked blankly. Gloom muttered something to himself inside. All right, fine. I'll concede the point that the Night Guard isn't treated the best, and also the point that they wouldn't have taken you seriously regardless. I'll even concede that from a certain perspective, he looked hard at Prey, that might even have been funny. But I'll say this. Gloom leaned across the table, making Prey shrink back in his seat. You're putting too much thought into all of this. Lighten up! Boop! Gloom's serious expression broke, and before Prey could leap away, the Thestral shot out a forehoof and lightly poked Prey on the nose. What? Prey asked, crinkling his nose, currently too confused to be mad that Gloom had touched him. Is he taking complete leave of his senses? He hadn't even seen that coming in the sergeant's thoughts. It had been completely spontaneous. Gloom sat back in his seat with a lazy grin. You're overthinking everything, Prey. Not every pony is an anomaly that you've got to factor into whatever calculations you run in your head. Sometimes you just gotta be yourself and trust other ponies, he said. Trust ponies? Never. But Prey was far from stupid and didn't say that out loud. So instead, he just humphed and stretched across the table for his bowl the third time. Crimson slowly slid the bowl into his reach, examining Prey through heavy-lidded eyes. You are very strange, but because this serves the good of Princess Luna in the long run, I see no harm, he said. And it's not up to you. It's up to Sergeant Gloom. He's our babysitter by Royal Knight Princess decree. Remember? Prey reminded him, wagging his spoon at Crimson. Unfortunately, yes, I'm responsible for you two mental asylum cases. And my diagnosis is, there's been far too much deep talk and philosophy for one day. By the night. This is, what, the third one today? We need to cut down on that. It's exhausting. Gloom laughed lightly. I believe that is just the 14-hour shift, sir, Crimson said carefully. Both Gloom and Prey raised their brows at the Red Pegasus. Did I hear that right? Was that a second joke? Gloom asked in fake amazement. Crimson just shrugged, as expressionless as ever. Prey dug into his vegetable stew while it was still warm after surreptitiously checking for poison, gulping down the chunks of cauliflower and carrot like they might run away or get stolen if he didn't consume them first. Gloom gave Prey a look and a thought of, I've seen wolves less ravenous, but didn't say anything and just got on with his own lackluster stew, Crimson reluctantly joining him a minute later in the consumption of Cookie's cooking. Prey was just finishing up scraping out the bowl when he heard them coming. They'd just entered his perception range, and he could hear their thoughts. There were 5 of them, and they were heading purposefully straight for him and Crimson. Prey froze. Deep-rooted instinctual fear gripped him. For a split second, he'd hovered in indecision. Fight? He would only have to lay a hoof on them and it would be over. But it wouldn't be worth it, would it? His eyes locked on Gloom, his warden and jailer. He'd be caught straight away. He was surrounded by guards in the mess hall. Indecision wavered in Prey's heart. The moment stretched, lengthened, and ended as Prey did nothing. Yes, look at you! So adorable! Squealed a mare as she grabbed Prey from behind in a hug, pulling him up into a hug as she nuzzled his wool. So cute and fluffy! Gloom looked up at the intrusion, mouth open to protest, but stopped. What are you? Crimson started, half rising from the bench. Welcome to the Royal Guard! The group cheered as they hurled a bucket of confetti in Crimson's face. Don't touch me! Prey's high-pitched squeak of fury went unheard as the cheer of the 5 royal guards who had come over started to laugh. What? Crimson sputtered. Bits of colored paper stuck to his mane. It's the Royal Guard made welcome, one of the Pegasi laughed. Used to do it with rice, but Cookie complained about the waste of food. The unicorn with the empty bucket joined in, settling it down on the table. But I am in the Night Guard, seemed to be the only thing Crimson could come up with, casting a confused look back at Gloom, who was just smirking faintly. Ah, the Night Guards all come from their big brother, the Royal Guard, so you're still one in our books, the Pegasus answered cheerfully. Hey, stop struggling! I only want to give you a cuddle! The Earth Pony mare hugging Prey crooned as Prey flailed at her. Put me down! His squeak of outrage made them all laugh, except for Crimson, who still looked confused. He's so cute! Are you looking after him for some pony or something? The mare asked, her Earth Pony heritage making her quite unaware of Prey's struggles to free himself. No, Gloom grinned. He's been inducted into the Night Guard as a special case to keep him out of trouble. He's quite the hoofful, let me tell ya. His eyes taunted Prey. You wanted to act like a child, so here you go. Prey knew this wasn't a serious situation, and that any act he took to escalate it, like, say, shredding the mare's mind and turning her into a vegetable, would result in death by an outraged alicorn. But the instinctual fear of being touched, especially by a pony, was striving to override his rational mind. I will kill you! Prey seethed, heart hammering under his all-too-brittle ribs. All the strong Earth Pony would have to do would be to squeeze too hard and he'd break like a twig. His hoof twitched mere inches from the legs across his chest as the mare, called Topaz Honey, rubbed her cheek vigorously against Prey's head. Your ears are just the softest! Oh, what happened to this one? Never mind, I'll kiss it better. Too bad you aren't a filly or you'd look adorable in a tutu! None were really paying attention to Prey's struggles, only as light amusement that he was providing with Topaz. They chanted merrily away. None of them realized that Prey was mere seconds away from killing one of their number. They just chuckled. They were laughing at him. This wasn't a joke. This was dead serious to Prey, but they just thought it was funny. None of them understood the irrational fear, the clammy terror. They just laughed. I was not expecting... I expected I'd made an enemy of every pony at breakfast, Crimson said carefully. Why, what'd you do? Songbird and a couple of the others were apparently racist to the Night Guard this morning, the Pegasus said. You know how it goes. Songbird, really? That's not like her. Usually she's much better behaved than that. I'll talk to her later, Topaz Honey said, finally looking up from nuzzling Prey. There's no need for that, Gloom said. At much the same time, Crimson announced, It's not worth your time. So, why you've got a sheep? So, why have you got a sheep? Is he your adopted little brother or something, Crimson? The lieutenant says until recently some pony had an adopted baby dragon in the palace, the unicorn asked. No, I'm not related to Prey at all, Crimson replied somewhat stiffly. New in the ISND division of the Night Guard. Any pony heard of it? Gloom asked. No, sorry, sir, can't say I have, the unicorn answered, using the formal address now that Sergeant Gloom had asked him a direct question. It's just Gloom while I'm not on duty. But yeah, it's new in the Night Guard. You'll probably hear about it soon. It's a small task group made up of us 3, set up to track down drug dealers, smugglers, and other stuff like that, Gloom explained, refraining from going into detail. Their purpose wasn't exactly secret, but no need to tell every pony more than that. Well, I wish the both of you the best of luck, sir, and your lamb. Night Guard or Royal Guard, stopping criminal scum is all that matters. There was a chorus of agreements from them all, and a general smattering of good luck wishes, while the unicorn started to gather up the confetti with a brush spelled back into the bucket. It would be against regulations to leave a mess. Topaz finally loosened her grip enough for Prey to squirm free and dash under the table unnoticed, while the ponies exchanged a few more words before they left. See you around. Nice to talk to you. Congratulations once again. Perhaps we'll get to train together sometime, Crimson. Have a good evening. Gloom and Crimson offered smiles and returned the goodbyes, or Gloom did anyway, with the departing ponies only flinching ever so slightly at his fangs. That was better than I had been led to fear, Crimson commented quietly once the royal guards had left. Some of them are all right, I guess, Gloom said with a small shrug. I think Topaz wanting to cuddle Prey was what made them really come over. That and wanting to throw confetti in your face, he added. You did not warn me that I should be on my guard, Crimson said, as if that were all the explanation needed. Hey, it wasn't a test on your reflexes or anything. They were just doing what the royal guard do. They are quite big on their traditions, as I think you'll find out before too long, Gloom told him. Are all their traditions like that? Nah, just most of the time. Mentioning time, we should be going. We don't have time for a full dinner. We've unfortunately still got stuff to do. Grab the trays and we'll drop them off as we go, Gloom said, standing up. Prey, where are you? He asked, casting around before thinking to check under the table. Come on out from under there. Topaz is gone, he added with a mocking grin. Prey was sitting like a statue against the table leg in the shadow. He didn't say anything to Gloom's taunt, just slowly got up and shuffled out, head down. Gloom didn't think anything of it as they set off for the mess hall's exit. If anyone had been crouched down low enough to meet Prey's eye, it might have been a very different story. They laughed. Perhaps it didn't mean anything to them, but it had meant something to Prey. A deep-seated fear originating back from when he was in the Resistance's clutches. And they'd laughed. Unforgivable! By the time they'd reached their destination, Prey had calmed down and the imperceptible tremors in his legs had ceased. It wasn't that Prey had nearly lost control of himself, because he hadn't. Not nearly. Only about half. Prey was always aware of who he was and what he was doing, but at least the fear mixed with adrenaline had finally worked its way out of his heart. No one liked the feeling of being afraid after all. You two wait here. If you know how to stand at attention, then stand at attention. I'm to report to Captain Nighthawk. It shouldn't take so long, so just wait till I'm finished, Gloom ordered, and it was an order. He was back in sergeant mode. The fact that they'd been told to wait outside made it obvious what, or more accurately, who, Gloom was reporting about. Them. The two recently freed criminals, and he didn't want them present for said report. Gloom knocked, and the gruff voice of Nighthawk ordered him to come in and shut the door, Sergeant. That left just the two of them standing outside in the otherwise deserted corridor. This was the first time that Gloom had let them out of his sight for more than a minute. Prey looked at Crimson, who, as per Gloom's order, stood at attention. It was a fairly good stance as well. Straight, legs braced, wings folded tightly, tufted ears up and yellow eyes forward. It was just the two of them. Prey didn't actually have anything he wanted to say to the Pegasus. The opportunity to talk unobserved didn't currently hold any appeal to Prey, and to be honest, he was still feeling a tad bitter. So they waited in silence. 10 minutes passed, and no sign of Gloom returning. That was fine. Prey was a patient lamb. After a further 5 minutes with still no sign of the sergeant, Prey decided it was likely that Gloom had been caught up in something else by Captain Nighthawk, and so wouldn't be out anytime soon. Prey sat himself down to wait, receiving an earflick from Crimson for breaking stance, which Prey ignored. 10 minutes later, a pair of night guards, a unicorn and a thestral, went by. They eyed Crimson and Prey carefully, before entering the next door down the hall, the lieutenant's office. Unlike the Royal Guard, they clearly knew where Prey and Crimson came from. Another 10 minutes of silence. It seemed like being a night guard meant a lot of standing around doing nothing in the late hours of the day. Prey was just running over some old plans that he'd concocted back in the confines of Dreverton in case he'd ever got free one day, and deciding what was possible and what was completely unfeasible even by his own standards, when Gloom finally returned. Prey's eyes flicked open as Crimson's hooves stamped as he came more fully to attention. "Is everything all right, sir?" he asked. "You were in there for a while. What went wrong?" Prey asked, brushing back his ear as he tiredly got to his hooves. He'd asked that question specifically to make Gloom think about the answer, so he could read it as it ran through the Thestral's head. "Something like this happening already. I'm not ready. Not a team yet. I must do my duty for Princess Luna, though. Must bring justice to the memory theft victims." Gloom cleared his throat. It's not a problem for today. We'll make a start on it in the morning, but for now, we're done for the night. Let's go back to the bunk room, he said, tiredness evident in his tone and the slope of his ears. It had been a long day for them all. Crimson nodded, accepting Gloom's words. Prey didn't. Some crime or the like has been committed, and Captain Nighthawk wants the new division to pull its weight, right, sir? Prey asked, looking carefully at the sergeant. Gloom blinked. Not sure why I'm even surprised. Got in one again, Prey, he said. It must be something that can't be dealt with by the normal Royal Guard, Prey noted, still carefully observing Gloom. A crime that falls under what the ISND specialties are supposed to cover. Treason? Smuggling? Spies? Intelligence? Kidnap? Kidnap the foal and the mother's memories have been stolen. Prey! Prey! It's a problem for tomorrow. The Royal Guard are done with the can already, but we're all too tired to do any good tonight. But we'll get on it first thing in the morning, Gloom told him, rubbing a fetlock across his eyes. Gloom didn't wait for an answer and set off, leading them back along the route that Prey recognized memorizing. It would take them back to the bunk room where they'd slept away the previous night. Already, the maze-like palace corridors were taking their correct place on an internal map in Prey's head. Prey wasn't thinking about that, though. He was thinking about what he'd heard in Gloom's thoughts. Stolen memories. Why did that seem so familiar to what had originally brought him out of Dreverton? It could just be a coincidence, but Prey had a bad feeling in his gut. Mind mages weren't common. From what Prey knew, almost every form of mind magic was forbidden. And Prey was 100% positive that Celestia strictly censored or controlled access to any knowledge about such magics. It's certainly what she'd been doing 57 years ago, much to his frustration when he tried finding even so much as a reference note in any magical tome he stole. Different city or not, for another such incident that was going to involve him again to happen so soon, it was suspicious. Something bigger is going on, Prey thought, but without more information or being able to examine any evidence, there wasn't currently anything he could do to find out what it was. Arriving back at the bunk room, Gloom lit a candle to light the dim room, although Prey suspected it was more for his benefit than either of theirs. The Thestral's slit eyes gave excellent night vision, which Prey was sure creeped other ponies out all the more. Predators hunted at night. Prey also suspected that Crimson's own yellow eyes, although not slit pupils, still saw better in the dark than his own. Maybe he'd find some way to correct that flaw in the future. Right, Gloom said, yawning hugely, prominently displaying the other key difference in Thestrals from ponies, not counting the bat wings. Daily debriefing session and then I'm going to sleep. I haven't got more than 5 hours a night for the past 2 weeks, and the day and night shifts keep getting switched around. My body's clock's broken, so I'm really looking forward to a full 8 hours of sleep, Gloom said, pulling off his helmet and settling it down on the closest bunk. Debriefing? For what, sir? We were with each other all day and so couldn't have missed anything, Crimson said. Apart from whatever you aren't telling us Captain Nighthawk told you, Prey grumbled. No, what I meant was just talk with each other. You know, discuss, like last night. Trying to build teamwork and all that, Gloom said, waving his hoof in a vague circular motion. Teamwork is just obeying the chain of command. You do whatever the person holding the chain says, Prey told him. Gloom barked a laugh. That was fairly quick. I'll give you that one. But no dice. We're still doing this. You two could benefit from some interaction. You aren't exactly... Gloom trailed off, struggling to come up with a word that correctly encapsulated all the strangeness that was Prey and Crimson. Social? Amicable? Stable? Sane? Friendly? Nice? Prey suggested. Normal, Crimson supplied flatly. Gloom sighed. This ain't a rant at you. Look, normal isn't a requirement around here. In fact, it helps if you're a bit strange in the Night Guard, Gloom joked. But trying helps, especially when working with other ponies in a professional environment. Prey snorted. This was ridiculous. He wasn't normal, and never would be. He had no interest in being so either, especially for them. Even a blind goat could see that much. Yet somehow even Gloom's enhanced thestral vision had missed the obvious. Oh well, just play along, he thought. Right, debriefing. Let's do it. What's next? Prey asked dismissively as he wandered over to his bed. This is stupid, but I gotta take it seriously. So tired, though, I can barely keep my eyes open. Gloom started undoing his shin guards. Just anything, really. This debriefing thing is gonna be a daily occurrence, so let's not turn it into a chore. Just 5 minutes and then done. But seeing as you two are still supposed to be integrating back into society after your... Gloom hesitated briefly before deciding to say it just how it was. Imprisonment is for the best. This is going to help you with that. Crimson just nodded and shuffled his wings. Whether that was in genuine acceptance or just acknowledgement that he'd heard what Gloom had said wasn't so clear. Prey felt anger flare to life in his chest, like an ember suddenly fed kindling. They were the ones who'd shoved him in Dreverton to rot, thrown away the key and forgotten about his existence until Captain Valor deemed him useful. They were the ones who'd set the border guard and Captain Firestrike. Their action, or inaction, had contributed to the deaths of the only two people he cared about. Yet now, after all they'd done to him, they expected him to change and fit into their perfect little society. It infuriated him. But as he could do with almost every emotion except for fear, Prey controlled the response and hid it under an iron-wrought expression of calm innocence. Okay, how would you suggest we use these 5 minutes? Prey asked politely, as he stood up on his hind legs and began the process of hauling himself up onto his bunk. If they were going to waste 5 minutes, he may as well be comfortable whilst doing so. Bunk's too high. That's kind of amusing to watch. Prey ignored Gloom's thoughts as he pulled himself up and dragged the pillow over, then began to plump it. Just try being open and honest, I suppose. We're going to be working with secrets every day in this job, so having some pony to be honest with will help, Gloom suggested. Pathetic. They're so soft in absolutely everything they do, Prey snorted as he settled onto the pillow, which, because of his small size, was big enough for a bedroll all by itself. He folded his legs and waited. Come on, somebody say something, Gloom told them when neither of them made any move to speak. I am unused to this. Canterlot and the Night God, royalty in the palace. I have no experience with what is expected of me by Princess Luna, Crimson abruptly spoke up. Don't worry, you're doing fine. Everything's still very much up in the air, so it'll all sort itself out at some point. You're not gonna fail Her Majesty. In fact, none of us are. We'll just do our best, Gloom reassured him. It came off a bit awkward, but his thoughts were sincere. Prey fought the urge to gag. They all went back to just watching each other, Gloom and Prey sitting on their bunks and Crimson still standing by the closest door. Prey glanced between the two ponies, who were both looking at him expectantly. What? I don't have anything to add. Nothing you'd want to hear anyway. Gloom looked like he might protest that, but his thoughts were constantly being dragged back to sleep. All right, you gotta pass this time, but I expect you to contribute something tomorrow, Gloom yawned. Crimson's ears flicked at Prey in annoyance, so Prey gave him a big smile of innocence. Crimson snorted and turned away, trotting over into the middle of the room where there was the most space between the double bunk beds. While Gloom removed the last of his armor and stacked it in the footlocker, Crimson began a series of stretches. Prey watched with half an eye while carefully unwrapping the fresh bandage around his ear. It looked like Crimson was following some set of predetermined movements, oddly flowing as he moved from one set to the next. Prey ceased checking his ear to watch properly as Crimson finished his warm-up and began a series of swifter movements that were clearly martial arts in origin. One wing snapped out in a strike while Crimson pivoted his forehooves, before shifting stance and following up with another blow from the opposite wing, covering the opening the first strike had caused. Crimson was in complete control of his movements, making the flowing forms look easy, almost like a dance. However, Prey could tell that each stance the Pegasus moved through took a lot of effort to pull off so smoothly. It looked like the style was based exclusively around Pegasi because it incorporated wings heavily into the strikes and movements. Each form was basic, but there was no wasted movement nor effort. No step further than it had to be, no strike harder than was necessary. It was perfect in its simplicity. Crimson must have been practicing these movements since he was smaller than Prey. So this is what his father trained him in, Prey guessed. He was skeptical of how much use Crimson's martial arts would be in real combat. It was one thing to practice by yourself when there was no danger of getting hurt, and another to do so when someone was trying to kick your skull in. Crimson clearly had training and practice, and Prey wasn't going to underestimate that. But having never seen it in action, he was unimpressed. Being under pressure, sleep-deprived, a hoof deep in mud while someone screamed their life out next to you and unicorn fire blasted overhead would turn even the most hardened drill sergeant into a bumbling amateur who didn't know up or down, let alone keep it together enough to employ a high caliber of martial arts. Maybe Prey was being too judgmental. He hadn't actually seen anyone use martial arts in an actual fight before. Perhaps it was unbeatable. Or perhaps the simpler reason was that it was just a bad idea. Being able to crack a boulder with a single kick didn't do much good against a crossbow bolt or a unicorn blowing your head off. Gloom had finished stowing away his armor, but had also paused to watch the show. He caught Prey's eye and offered a faint grin. "Princess Luna knows what she's doing," he silently mouthed to Prey, before clambering into bed and pulling the gray blanket up. Prey looked down at the golden bands on his forelegs. "Unfortunately, you're not entirely wrong." Prey finished retying the bandage just as Crimson was coming to the end of his little dance, breathing lightly. Carefully, the Pegasus went about resettling his wings, straightening out each feather and pinions so they lay properly as he folded them. The stallion was a puzzle, but a remarkably simple one. "Good night, sleep well," Prey said out loud to Crimson, pulling his own covers back and sliding underneath. He got a grunt in response. Prey laid his head down on his uninjured side, flicking his good ear aside before he did so as to not go to sleep lying on it. Waking up with a dead ear wasn't something to be laughed at. Not that Prey planned to go to sleep. He had work to do. Crimson blew out the candle and climbed up into his own bunk. There was some shifting as he got comfortable, and Prey wondered if Crimson even followed a set pattern of practice forms for that. Once it had gone quiet, Prey settled down into the warm darkness to wait.